Drivers, start your engines!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him. He talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweater working for the man, alright. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Cool-headed when the heat is on, yeah. Save my baby from the burning building. Take her home with the sleepless sun, alright.
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you, he rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Hey, race fans, welcome to the Whoobazoo Radio Network, and welcome to another edition of Drafting the Circuits. My, oh my, we had a great weekend of racing to talk about. Before we get into all that, I've got a huge panel assembled of guys with a lot of energy tonight, and we've all been laughing and giggling before we got on the air, so it's going to be a great show tonight. But first, let me go around the table and introduce everybody. In the studio tonight, Mr. Gray Warren from Richard Childress Racing. Gray, how are you?
I'm doing great. Hope everyone else is.
Absolutely. Good to have you here, Gray. Also, Mr. Joey Barnes, who writes for IndyCar.com and also runs Motorsports Tribune. Joey Barnes, great to have you back on the show.
Good to be here, man.
Absolutely, yeah. Looking forward to talking about all the IndyCar stuff from this weekend with you. Richard Youden, back in the house again tonight. Richard, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Yourself?
Doing great, doing great. Seth Eggert, back in the house again. Seth, the NASCAR correspondent at Motorsports Tribune. How are you?
I'm doing good.
And we have the IndyCar correspondent for Motorsports Tribune, Christopher DeHarde. Last but not least, Chris, I know you worked all day today, but, man, thanks for taking the time out to come back on with us. I always enjoy your insights. Chris, how are you tonight?
I'm doing very well. I'm so happy to be back. It's been way too long. It's been way too long.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, like I said, yeah, we've got a stellar panel tonight. But let's talk about this weekend in racing. We had NASCAR was at Bristol, IndyCar was at Pocono. One big thing I noticed for both races that it looked, at least from the viewer, that the attendance was way up for both these events compared to last year. And that's a great sign, man. That's a great sign for IndyCar. That's a great sign for Bristol, and NASCAR. So it is great to see a lot of folks getting out to the racetrack this weekend, and they were treated to some pretty darn good races. But I want to lead off with the IndyCar race. Man, did they ever get the setup right on the cars for this particular track? You know, we had Phoenix that was questionable. We had Indy that was great that nailed the setup at Indy. We had Iowa that was just hard to pass. But this race at Pocono, they've got the correct combination of aero grip, mechanical grip, and just the right amount of downforce to make the racing quite exciting, frenetic, but yet not frightening like we've seen at Texas or in that last Fontana race a couple years ago. So Will Power endured a tough day and took the win ahead of his Penske teammate Joseph Newgarden. Newgarden extends his point lead over Scott Dixon. Power gains a couple points in the championship. Good day all around for Penske Racing, but a lot of strong cars in there, a lot of strong Hondas. Rossi looked good all day. Kanaan looked good all day. But just a really fantastic race. Now, I want to throw it to you, Joey. What are your thoughts coming out of this Pocono race? Because everything I've read and seen and everything that I agree with is totally positive about this race and this place.
I mean, I thought the race was awesome. I mean, we talked about it before the show, before we came on air, and it's 42 lead changes throughout the day, and then you had a total of 590 passes among 22 drivers over 500 miles, and there was variety at the front. It wasn't Honda dominated, it wasn't Chevy dominated, it wasn't Penske dominated. So there was a good mix, and there's a lot of diversity as far as strategy calls and different things. I mean, that's how Will kind of ended up inheriting the lead, and I know Chris will touch on that later. But, overall, I was pleasantly surprised with everything that we saw, and it was a show similar to Indianapolis, but because they needed to do an increase in downforce levels just slightly, they weren't as trimmed out, and so we saw where there was a little bit more movement, especially with turn one, going into turn one, and then going into turn three. And eventually Will Power ended up using that to his advantage by covering the low line in three, much like what we saw Ryan Hunter-Reay do at 2014 at Indy. So it's kind of interesting to see how those things coincide, and it was a show that I kind of expected to be similar to Indy, but it was that much more amped up.
Yeah, it was awesome, man. For you listeners who are unfamiliar with Pocono was a tri-oval. It's a triangular in shape. All three turns are different. They're banked differently. They have a different degree of angle to them. They're patterned after some of the classic racetracks. The track was designed by Roger Ward, who wanted to take three of his favorite racetracks and make his dream course. So you've got the turn one is modeled after the old defunct Trenton Speedway. Turn two, modeled after Indianapolis. And turn three is modeled after Milwaukee. So it presents quite a challenge to get that set up right. And the track was designed for Indy cars. And the current Indy cars to this day still perform well at that track, in that setup, and just what a show they put on, especially when you look at the start where everybody fanned out 7 wide, and so you figure there's 22 cars starting 7 wide. The whole field was only 3 deep. It was breathtaking to watch. The start there, and then the restarts were the same. So again, we said Will Power had won the race, but Will suffered some adversity. He had gone a lap down early. He had to endure not only a front wing change early in the race, but then later in the race had to have a rear wing change. And there were a couple of folks confused about how he actually was able to, come off that, get back on the lead lap and actually win the thing. And Chris, you paid a lot of attention to the race, so it did happen. It was done. There was no chicanery, no gimmies to Penske. But Chris, kind of explain to our listeners how exactly Mr. Will Power pulled this off.
So the biggest thing is, first of all, what happened in the beginning of the race. Will's front wing adjuster, a little ring on the top of the nose, actually broke. So the front wing actually was able to adjust itself, which is why he needed to come in and pit. So when that took place, you had him coming in to get that changed under green, and the stop took a little longer than expected. He lost an entire lap, and he was able to get a lap back under caution after he took a waiver on after not pitting when the leaders pitted. Now, the reason why he was able to win, Will actually was able to decided to make a stop on the last lap of the caution for, I believe it was the wreck that had J.R. Hildebrand and James Hinchcliffe involved. When he did that, he restarted at the back of the pack, but was able to go longer than anybody else because there was another caution 10 laps earlier for Sebastian Saavedra lightly making contact with the wall exiting turn 1 and stopping in the tunnel turn. Now, Power doing that, he was able to stretch his stint longer to where he was able to pit, I think, a lap 160 or I think it was 160 is when he made his last pit stop, or 161 rather. But the 5 or 6 laps before that pit stop, Will turned his fastest laps of the race at that point, and during that time actually turned the fastest leader lap of the race right before he pitted. He was running laps at 217 miles an hour, while everybody else on track was doing laps around 213, 14, 15. So that's how Power was able to get his gap enough where he was able to get the lead and maintain it after that pit stop.
So now, towards the end there, we had Will didn't walk away with this thing. He had a very racy Joseph Newgarden on his tail and an Alexander Rossi right there behind him. I thought Will did a great job of trying to protect that inside line. If he'd have let Joseph have that inside, it may have lost the race to Joseph. But I thought Will's driving was just brilliant. Will is a guy who early in his career was pegged as this road course specialist. You can't win on ovals. His first oval win came at Texas a number of years ago, and since then he's performed pretty darn well on ovals. He's kind of got this thing figured out. He's got a win at Fontana. This win at Pocono is his second consecutive win at Pocono. So really crafty driving by Will there at the end to kind of preserve this thing. Even though Joseph admits that Will was so hooked up, he probably didn't have enough for him.
Well, the funny thing about Will winning is that he was actually the first driver to ever win back-to-back IndyCar races at Pocono. Joseph, in my opinion, wasn't going to have anything for Will because I think Will knew more about what it took to win on super speedways than Joseph does. I mean, Joseph's only oval win, I think, is at Iowa. But not only that, Joseph has had good runs at Pocono, so I mean, he's not going to be upset with second place. Another thing we also need to remember is that Alexander Rossi in third could have challenged the guys up front late in the going, except that he had one problem. His fuel mixture knob actually fell off in the car, and the team actually were trying to get him to take his glove off under yellow and reattach the knob or try and fiddle with it, but Rossi didn't want to do that because he figured that he wouldn't be able to get his glove back on.
Yeah, that's a tough one there. But he was even with the fuel mixture set at a not ideal setting. Coming home with a third place there, pretty solid run for Rossi. But if it weren't for those, the silly little problem there, I think Rossi could have won that thing.
He has a car for it.
I mean, he looked really, really like the class of the field to me, especially in the early stages. It was resembling the Indy 500, from lap 1 to 100. I mean, it was Rossi's show for a little while, and it started to look that way again at Pocono. And I think, all in all, when we look at this, I'm really shocked that we haven't seen Rossi win yet this year, given the solid runs that we've seen at Long Beach, at Indy, and of course now at Pocono. But we're coming up on some of his good tracks. You look at Watkins Glen, you look at Sonoma, where he finished 5th last year. I mean, there's still something there for Rossi to do this year. But I think when we look at this season and how everything's playing out, I mean, there's still 15 guys mathematically eligible for this championship. And obviously, realistically, we're probably looking at the top 5, top 6 guys entering the last 3 races. But if Will Power somehow goes from where he is in the title race right now, which I believe is 5th, and ends up winning this championship, I think it's safe to say that this was probably the drive of the season for him. I mean, this was one of the most flawlessly executed drives given everything he had to overcome. And, on a day that it looked like it was going to be Dixon or Kanaan or Rossi, Penske just honestly didn't look like they were that caught up with everybody else. So, I mean, Scott Dixon ended up leading the most laps of the day with 51. Rossi led the next most with 44. And, both of those guys looked like the class of the field for a long time. So for Will Power to overcome what he did to do this, it was just a phenomenal effort. I think championship picture, when you really start to look at it, the 2 people that really didn't do themselves any favors got to be Elio Castroneves, who ended up finishing 7th. And then you got to look at Graham Rahal, who was mixing it up for the lead with Tony Kanaan, and it was a lot of fun to see because they would just mix up and swap out who was diving down into turn 3 lap after lap there at the middle part of the race. But he ends up finishing 9th. And so, keeping everything in perspective, he was really at the tail end of this championship battle trying to make a fight, the David versus the Goliath kind of thing. And right now, it's hard to think that especially heading to Gateway, where Penske's owned the short ovals this season. You look at Phoenix, you look at Iowa. I mean, Penske's only loss on the ovals this year is at the Indy 500. You start to look at it, and everybody expects it to be a Penske party at Gateway. I think Graham might be at the back end of this championship fight for sure.
Yeah, he may indeed be, yeah. But, I mean, as you look at this thing, yeah, so Will is realistically, he's, I believe, 42 points out of first place, which is, even though there's only 3 races remaining, it's, double points to Sonoma. But realistically, as close as these guys at the top has been, Will needs a little help from some misfortune to fall upon Mr. Newgarden or Mr. Dixon, but you've got all these guys who are in the thick of the thing, right? This remaining schedule, other than Gateway, Dixon has run very well at Watkins Glen and Sonoma, multiple wins there. Actually, weird footnote: the only Gateway winner in the current field is Castro Neves. Not sure that what he learned from his win back there many years ago will translate to the new car. But again, the Penske's have been good in the oval, so could be good for Castro Neves. So this thing is going to go down to the wire, and the way I kind of see it going down is like, Newgarden he's doing well, he's hot. I just have a feeling he's going to lose a close one this year. He's going to lose one in the finale to a seasoned guy like either Scott Dixon, Will Power, or Castro Neves, and then he's going to come back next year and be nearly unbeatable. I don't think Newgarden is right there at the championship level yet, but then again, he's got 3 races to prove me wrong.
I think what's funny about this championship is, last year we saw Simon Pagenaud clean house, and going into the last race of the year, Will Power ended up having that gearing issue and didn't even get a chance to really fight for the title. Ironically, last year, Charlie Kimball and Will Power collected each other, or I should say Charlie Kimball collected Will Power at Watkins Glen, and it was actually Charlie Kimball that ended up hitting Will Power at Pocono this go-around. So if Will Power can dodge the gearing issues and Charlie Kimball, I think, honestly, he's a legitimate threat for the final few rounds. I think there's unfinished business at Sonoma for sure. But looking at Pagenaud, the defending champion, he's consistent, but for whatever reason, he's not been as dominant as he was last year. And, I think I don't believe you're completely wrong to think that about Newgarden. I mean, you got to learn how to lose one to win one is always the mantra with racing. We've seen Elio lose a lot of close championships.
And
I think
we've seen Will win a lot of close ones too.
Yeah, so I think that when you really look at this, I think Gateway is incredibly critical for Dixon just because we expect it to be a Penske party. And, kudos to Honda for upping their game at every venue that's not a super speedway, and kudos to Chevrolet for upping their equipment level at super speedways, because we saw an evenly matched field at Pocono. We've seen an evenly matched field for a majority of the races, regardless of there being different identities in the aero kits. So this is the final year of this aero package before we go to the Universal kit in 2018, and, it's setting up to be a really, really good one.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah. Now I want to talk about a little bit of the silly season news, right? Because we talked about last week. Mikael Aloshin is out at in the 7 car at Schmidt Peterson. They brought in Sebastian Saavedra. He ran at Pocono. He's going to run a Gateway the last 2 races of the season. Jack Harvey will be picking up that ride. Harvey, who was a standout in Indy Lights, and haven't heard much from him since he was at Indy this year. So I'm not sure if he's bringing a little money to the table or whatnot. But I did read an article yesterday that said it was confirmed that Tony Kanaan will not be at Ganassi Racing next year, and is talking to Schmidt Peterson. That makes a lot of sense. We've all heard that. Unfortunately, this particular article I read was out of a news source out of Brazil, and the entire article was in Portuguese. Now, reading Portuguese is not my forte. It sounds like Spanish, but it's not. And in high school, I took German and didn't take Spanish, so I couldn't glean a lot of information out of this article other than the fact that they're saying that it's pretty much a done deal that TK is moving on from Ganassi. So I know, Joey, you're in the IndyCar paddock all the time. Chris, you're there as well. What are you hearing about TK and his plans for next year, or who are they looking for to put in that 10 car?
They make Google Translate, right? Like if you get on Chrome, you can hit the translate. You don't have to worry about reading Portuguese. Sorry, Frank.
That's all well and good, but yeah. But you ever look at what Google Translate puts out there? It's
sometimes it's bad.
Very, very disjointed and whatnot. Yeah, that's how I got the gist of the article. So, and I don't know who the sources were for this, but I haven't read this in an American-based website. I haven't heard it from Racer or Miller or Pruitt or any of these guys that seem to be on the right there with the scoop.
On the outside looking in, it makes some sense for TK to be looking at something like Schmidt-Peterson. I think, personally, I think that if the big domino that's been everybody's waiting to fall is if Andretti's going to move to Chevy, and if that's the case, then he's likely losing Sato and he's likely losing Rossi. That's the big time rumor. We know for sure he loses Sato. We don't know yet 100% if he loses Rossi. That's the wild card in the entire silly season. So I actually think that there's a small sliver of a chance that if they go to Chevy, that we could see TK move back to Andretti for at least a season. But personally, I could also see Hinch in that position. We could see a lineup next year at Ganassi that is Dixon, Rossi, and Hinchcliffe, which is daunting to think about and would be a pretty good rival to Penske. There's a lot to be left on the table because Andretti hasn't made that move. So from the outside looking in, TK to Schmidt makes sense. I think that he's going to go to an established team. So the Juncos Racing situation, the Carlin, or even Harding Racing. Harding Racing's pretty set with Gabby Chavez. They've got a multi-year agreement, and next year they're planning on going full-time racing. And
Joey, I did hear a couple of rumblings that they're going to go 2 cars next year. Harding, that is.
I mean, I talked to Larry Kerr the other day. He didn't tell me anything on that one.
Okay, somebody had.
They don't tell me everything, though. I mean, there's a reason they keep everything. All these race teams keep it close to the vest. But
I think everyone would like to have 2 cars, but it comes to a matter of looking at the bank balance.
Yeah, I mean, they still need to make sure they establish funding for Gabby's car for the full season before they can really think about 2. I think that there's a reason Saavedra is somebody that was in that Schmidt car, and I think that that's a small possibility for next season. Next year for Juncos' lineup, I personally believe it's going to be Spencer Pigot and Kyle Kaiser. I know that at Carpenter Racing, it was put out there on Racer that Carpenter would like to have 3 teams with him in the part-time situation and have Pigot run full-time alongside Hildebrand. I personally think that if they don't do that, Pigot's going to be the guy at Juncos, and we're going to see Zach Veach as the part-timer over at switching out with Carpenter. But, all in all, everything I've heard is Chilton's gonna end up taking that Carlin ride, and Jack Harvey's going to be piloting next to him, and they're going to give a 1-year option there and kind of see how Mateus Lights pans out in Indy Lights. Trevor Carlin's very high on Leist. I think the other thing to think on is where does Ed Jones fit into this? Because he's not guaranteed a spot at Dale Coyne next year. Does he float to Ganassi? Does he float to Andretti? Because we've seen the potential is certainly there with runs that he's had at Indy and other areas. And I would like to see him re-up with Dale Coyne if possible, if they can get the money and everything together. But because I love the team of Bourdais and Ed Jones together. I think it's a really cool dynamic. And they've done a lot of good things this year, especially prior to Indy. So, outside looking in, I know you asked me about TK, and I kind of went on a rant, but
that's okay. But my next question is about Bourdais. I mean, Bourdais is clear to drive. Do you think we'll see him at Gateway, or do you think he's going to sit out to Watkins Glen and get back in on a road course? I mean, he hasn't made the return date is still to be announced. Obviously, Pocono probably wasn't the place for him to return. But Gutierrez has paid for that ride for the rest of the season up front. And, Coyne has said that if he needs to, he'll put a 3rd car there. But do you think he'll put a 3rd car there for 3 races, or just the 2, or maybe just the 1?
When I talked to Dale, nobody expected Bourdais really to be fit and ready until Sonoma. And we only talked to Dale, or I only talked to Dale about Sonoma in particular, and he said, look, if I've got to make 3 cars, we'll put 3 cars out there for him. And it was only at Sonoma. That said, it's the same package, the same everything else. Watkins Glen and Sonoma are very similar in how they set up the car. So I think that it's really just going to be the last 2. I don't see anything to be gained by running Gateway with Bourdais. The entry list should be out tomorrow for Gateway, and I don't expect Bourdais to be on it. I say tomorrow. This thing's going to be cutting out at when are we pushing this podcast out? Wednesday?
We broadcast.
Yeah,
we broadcast on Thursday. Tonight is Tuesday night, so this might be old news by the time we go live, but is what it is. So you're feeling like Bourdais will sit out Gateway and just wait for a road course to kind of ease back into driving?
Yeah, I do. I know he's chomping at the bit, but understand this is that Dale Coyne, I mean, that's an extra effort for the crews, and for Craig Hampson and Michael Cannon and all those guys. And so to stretch them a little bit further, and they had a lot of issues this year with wrecked race cars, just pushing the envelope. I mean, they totaled 1 car for sure, from what I was told. The rest they've managed to fix up and rebuild, but that's a lot of work on the teams. It's a lot of just work overall. And so to come back from that and to put 3 cars out there, and it's really tough on a team to stretch themselves that far. But Dale seems determined to do it.
To kind of go back on what Joy was saying, the entry list actually for Gateway was released on Tuesday, and Bourdais is not on the entry list.
There you go.
There you go. Mystery solved. And it would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for you meddling kids and your dog. So with no further ado, again, hats off to IndyCar, hats off to Pocono for a fantastic event this weekend. And also, I did want to report our guests from last week, Dave Thompson and Jack Maloney, who were running the support series there with the Challenge Cup. They had a great time. They published a bunch of pictures on their webpage, and on their Facebook page. So look up Challenge Cup on Facebook or the Challenge Cup's website. Those guys had a great time supporting Pocono. Supporting IndyCar at Pocono, and it was a pleasure to have those guys on. So before we move on, let's go round table, make some picks for Gateway. Gateway is kind of a wild card. We haven't raced there in a while. Anybody know, Chris, top of your head?
2003.
2003. Okay, yep. And Elio Castroneves, the only former Gateway winner in the field. So I'm gonna put Seth on the spot and give you the first pick for Gateway.
Since he won there, I'll go with Elio Castroneves. Only fitting for him to win the most recent race and their return.
There you go. And plus, you know what? He needs it. He needs it. He's in the thick of this championship. So, Richard, who you like for Gateway?
I'm going to go with another Penske car, Newgarden.
Okay, good pick. He was really solid at Iowa. Gray, you have any opinion on who's gonna do well at Gateway?
I'm going to go with Ryan Hunter-Reay. Seems to always do well on the short ovals, and he hasn't broken through and gotten a victory this year. Ran really good at Pocono this weekend, despite having a setback on Saturday and being cleared to race on Sunday morning. So, and he did a great job there. I think he's a little hungry. I think he might pick up the win.
All right, Ryan Hunter-Reay. Chris, you could be next.
All right. He finished 3rd at Phoenix. He finished 2nd at Iowa. I'm going with the 2011 Indy 500 Rookie of the Year, J.R. Hildebrand.
Okay. All right, Hildebrand. Joey Barnes?
So Connor Daly led testing back in May, but AJ Foyt Racing's had a tough go. Although, with the exception of Iowa, they've put at least one of their cars in the top 10 in every race. That said, I'm not going to pick an AJ Foyt Racing car because I'm not crazy, but I actually think Will Power is going to do it. Now that the repave happened, they tested on it. It's smooth surface. I think that Pocono was just kind of the beginning of his late season run, and so I think Power.
Man, that's an excellent pick. I was going to go with that, but since you took it before me, I'm going to go with a guy who's been clutch in championship time, and that'll be Scott Dixon. I think that the package is going to, kind of favor the Hondas. Maybe not. I don't know. I'm going to go with Scott Dixon. That's a guy who is clutch as all get out when it comes to championship time, and we are right there, which is a couple races left. So,
the Graham Rahal, after the test, said that this was going to be the best short oval show of the year.
I can't wait to see it. Because you're talking. It's a night race too, cooler temperatures. And it's going to be exciting. I don't know how the ticket sales are shaking out. I hope they've packed the place, but if they haven't, maybe they'll pack the place next year if they put it on a tremendous show. So,
yeah. And the last thing I'll say on this is hats off to Gateway for the repave, because there was a lot of cut tires at that first test. They repaved it. All the drivers are loving the repave. They say that there's a lot of grip there. They feel like there's a lot of side-by-side. And Gateway isn't, an ISC or an SMI track. They don't have a lot of money behind them. So they're really trying to invest in this opportunity and try to invest in keeping IndyCar and maybe even getting it to where NASCAR hangs around at that place a little bit longer. So hats off to Gateway for the repave.
And Joe, to your point, the guys at Gateway, they have a truck race there. They'd love to have an Xfinity race there, maybe even a Cup race in one date. But this IndyCar thing for them is going to be a tremendous weekend. They've done a great job of putting that show on. Can't wait to see how it comes down. I hope the stands are full. I hope the racing is great and the fans have a great time. But with no further ado, let's move over and talk about NASCAR. NASCAR was at Bristol night race. It's Bristol, baby. One of the coolest races of the year. And it was Mr. Kyle Busch who swept the weekend in all three series. Not all four series, according to Matt Weaver's article. But, I didn't have a chance to see a lot of it. I was watching in and off. But, Seth, I know you were tuned in. So take us through this Bristol thing, man. Kyle Busch was pretty strong at the end there. But young Mr. Eric Jones nearly won this thing. And that for Jones, that's the difference between being in the playoffs and not.
Well, Jones led quite a bit of race. He led just over half the race. He started from the pole. He never left the top five. He was inside in the battle the entire night. Kyle just flat out outdrove him. Kyle drove the high line, rode along the wall, while Eric Jones stuck with the traction compound, the track bite on the bottom of the track. And Kyle slowly caught up to him. With the help of lap traffic, both he and Matt Kenseth drove by him. And when Eric Jones tried to move up, he just didn't have the grip. He didn't have the speed that both Kyle Busch and Matt Kenseth had. Kyle Busch, this is his second weekend sweep, if you don't go by Matt Weaver. But on a side note to that, there are several modified teams that since that article have extended offers to Kyle Busch to run next year in the modified race there. So who knows? But,
hey, I'd love to see Kyle take him up on that.
I would actually think that would be very interesting. I don't think he's driven a modified as of yet. But going back to the weekend sweep, it was the second time he's done it in his career. He said what made this one special compared to the last one is Brexton. His son was there. He's 2 years old. He wasn't around back in 2010 when he first did the sweep. And Kyle, the last time he dominated all three races. This time he had to come from the back in the truck race because of a speeding penalty. He drove by everybody on the outside, just flat out outpaced everyone. Noah Gragson also started from the back on the same restart, Kyle's teammate, and Gragson could only make up 2 spots while Kyle Busch made up 18. In the Xfinity race, Kyle He was up front most of the night. I want to say he pretty much dominated that one. But in the Cup race, he started about mid-pack, had to work his way up there, ran down Eric Jones, his protege, as some call him, and took the lead with about 50 or so to go and never looked back. Other stories, there really wasn't much story other than the traction compound. Some people liked it, some didn't. Although there was one, Denny Hamlin on pit road tried to get a good spot coming off, completely stopped, ended up not getting the spot he wanted, and now there's talk of possibly a cone rule being considered on pit road at some tracks. Gray, what do you think about that?
That cone thing's something they do on some of the short tracks. This is the big leagues. I think we need to, there's other ways of fixing that issue. But, I thought all in all it was a pretty good race, decent crowd there for Bristol. Been a little bit down over the last few years, and of course they had a lot of hype coming into the night race. And Kyle Busch just put on a show all weekend long. And I don't know if any of you others saw the tweet that Kyle Larson put out on Sunday morning, but it said that he thought that Kyle Busch might just be the most talented driver to come along in his lifetime, and he said hats off to him. But he really did put on a great show, and it was a decent race up there. We had 21 lead changes among 6 drivers. Very competitive race. Like you alluded to, Eric Jones, it looked like for a while there he was probably going to pick up his first win, but he was stymied by the Kyle Busch Express. I think we've talked about this on some of the shows past, that Kyle Busch can be kind of a streaky kind of guy, and he's had some bad luck, run well all season long, and been in position to win. Probably he could be sitting here with 6 or 7 wins right now, and he's only got 2. I think he's peaking at the right time. I think that 18 team is going to head into the playoffs with a lot of momentum.
Now, Chris, you said you had an opinion on the cone rule.
Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree with Gray on this one. I think that the cone rule should be implemented in Cup at least. Well, let's start off in trucks and then work our way up to Cup. But I mean, everybody's a lot of people think, well, it's Cup, it's the top leagues, et cetera, et cetera. Let's face it, the SS and Racing Integrity kind of set sail in 2004, so there's not much left that we can really do to go down. I mean, considering we have stages now, in fact, I'm expecting them to announce that they're going to do various very length stages for next year. But quite frankly, I think that would be an interesting idea. But I'd like to see it implemented in trucks first before we see it in Cup.
Yeah, I agree. Either that or try in the All-Star race. I mean, they've tried just about everything else in the All-Star race. Why not try that in the All-Star race?
Why not Zoidberg?
Anyway, Richard.
Yeah, just a couple of news stories that came out over the Bristol weekend. One of them, I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but it's potentially a really serious accident on pit road. I think it was on Friday for one of the crew chiefs, Frankie Kerr, where the car actually fell off the jack while he was underneath it.
The jack buckled.
So very, very lucky there. He thought that the jack stands that they normally slide under the car were in place, and it turns out they weren't. And as you say, the jack buckled, and he took the full weight of the car on there. Amazingly, he was back at the track either the next day or it'd be the next day for Saturday night race, and was able to call the race. He did say it was good that they've got a week off to recuperate, because that's going to be pretty sore right now, I think. Very, very lucky there, and that is one of the difficulties with Bristol, is that because it's so small, it's not like a typical NASCAR track where you have the hauler and then you have a garage opposite the hauler where you can work. You're basically working out of the hauler or on pit road or wherever you can find space.
You're working on pit road essentially under a tent in a lot of cases, and up until a few years ago when they when they put the concrete pits down, you would be in soft asphalt, and on a very hot day, your jack and jack stands would sink down into the pavement, and it was really a mess. It used to be a mess. But you're talking about the incident there on pit road during practice. I would think that I wouldn't think, I don't know if fines will come out of it. I know during the course of the race, the NASCAR inspectors working pit road, if you have to jack your car up to go underneath it, they require you to put a jack stand under it before a crewman can crawl under it. So
and I think it's one of those very difficult things that everybody just gets so complacent about it because the jack stands keep going going underneath all the time. And on a side note to this, I don't know if anybody has seen this. I don't think we discussed it recently, but there is talk within NASCAR of actually going to a pneumatic system for jacking the car up, similar to what they're running IndyCar and V8 supercars down in Australia, so to get away from the jackman, both from a safety perspective and a cost-saving perspective, in that they can remove one of the members of the pit crew on a weekend.
Yeah, it would be 40 less people on pit road, 40 less people needing a plane ticket or a hotel room. So it would save a lot of money and be a big safety improvement.
And 40 less $10,000 jacks on pit road too, because that's what the price of these things has climbed to with all the development. And a lot of teams now, the top echelon teams are building their own jacks as well.
Yeah, we don't go to AutoZone and pick one up, that's for sure.
Yeah, so that's another thing. And I tell you, from the things I'm hearing, the discussions are leading to quite serious about this thing happening next year.
I think some of these leaks to the media as they're coming out are probably sort of deliberate leaks from NASCAR to try and get a feel for what the fans think of that. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not going to make any difference to the fans, really. They're not really going to notice it.
I mean, wouldn't this also be 40, well, technically 36, because that's all that goes to the track anymore, 36 less jobs? I mean, it's just more race cuts that end up happening.
Well,
a lot of these guys, a lot of these guys who work on the pit crew, a lot of them are contracted to the team, so they are not full-time. Some of them are, but a lot of them now are not full-time employees of the company that they will represent. I'm sure, Gray will know more about this, but back in the day, you'd have a guy who'd be a fabricator Monday to Thursday, and then Friday he'd get on a plane and be a jackman or a tyre changer. Now, these guys a lot of them are sort of college football players and the like, and are pretty high-end athletes, and will move around and work purely as contractors. So, yes, you're right, there are 40 less jobs, but whether that's considered a pure NASCAR job in the way that a team would consider it a job, or if it's a contractor, I don't know how they approach that.
Well,
go
ahead.
No, sorry, Gary, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and Richard's quite right, back in the day when I started, I mean, you were a dual purpose. You worked on the car, and then if you had any athletic ability, you went over the pit wall and you served as a pit crew member. In the last 15 or 20 years, that has begun to change. These guys have been hired for the purpose. There are not many dual purpose guys left now on the upper echelon pit crews. These guys are, like Richard said, these are former college athletes that have been hired, and basically that's what they do. They pit the car. And you're talking about some pretty high-priced talent for your over-the-wall guys. So there's one thing that they're talking about. That's a pretty high-priced salary you're gonna eliminate, plus travel and all the other things, the equipment and everything to go into it. So that's one thing. But there's so many other ways NASCAR can save money. This is just one thing. I don't know where this was initiated. I know we've seen the pneumatic jacks in sports car racing. We've seen it in IndyCar. And I imagine by now it's pretty well developed. We see it in IMSA. All those cars have the pneumatic jacks.
I mean, I look at this as just personal perspective. I look at this as just another thing in the long line of what's become just a constant evolving door of changes that leaves NASCAR without a pure identity. Like, 20 years ago, we had an identity in NASCAR, and now it just feels like they're picking little things from either Formula One or from short track or from this or that or now V8 supercars ish. And it's just like they used to be ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. And
well, you're right. NASCAR was antiquated in a lot of things they did. They still, using 5 lug nuts on a wheel when every other motorsports division in the world was using the single nut wheel. NASCAR stuck with stayed true to its stock car roots with things like that. I mean, we're looking at only 4 years ago, they went to fuel injection. So they're still, and the cars themselves are based on antiquated technology. And you're right, that they had kept that, and that was part of their identity. But I think, as we discuss every week, we talk about the problems and the issues with NASCAR and its dwindling fan base. I think they're looking at probably making some of these changes to appeal to a different fan base, to an evolving fan base that's somewhat different. So that's why I think we'll see more changes like this. And I agree with you to a degree, being a purist and being someone that's been involved in sport for over 30 years. Yeah, these changes are quite different. And in some ways, I don't really know what to think of them.
I think part of it as well is one of the great things and one of the, for want of a better word, pure things about NASCAR is more than probably any other major motorsport series in the world, it's driver based. Your results are based on the talent and the performance of the driver. And that's great for the fans. It's brilliant for the fans. But from the manufacturer's perspective, the guys like the Toyotas, the Fords and the Chevys and potentially, other manufacturers wanting to get involved in the sport, they want a bit of a return as well, I think. I think they want their technology to be highlighted. And I know the concept of highlighting technology in NASCAR is a bit of a contradiction, but there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that your everyday fan doesn't see. But, these aspects of some of these technological improvements help the car manufacturers legitimize their investment in NASCAR, because it's not a cheap sport to be involved in. And if they can help display technology and help display some of their advances in that sport, then I think that's a good thing. I know Toyota are, they're the team to beat at the moment, and they're pushing that quite heavily. And in the future, it may be Ford are the manufacturer to beat, or Chevy are the manufacturer to beat. But I think the more aspects that give the manufacturer something to work with, the more likely they are to be involved.
And that's very true. Yeah, but that's very true. In that, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna. Well, I think whenever I hear Brad Keselowski back in Kentucky make the comments he make talking about the package really putting the drivers in the box, and then you see things like Indianapolis happen where for an hour and a half nobody could get out of their own way, and it was red flags galore. And then the very next week you wreck on lap 1 at Pocono. The package has just made it to where it's so difficult to pass that it's just made everybody. It's almost like, it's going to sound terrible, but if you've got the ultimate short attention span, then the last 30 laps are definitely the thing for you. And because it's just going to end up becoming a wreck fest half the time, it seems like, because the package just confines the drivers. All these drivers in NASCAR are incredibly talented. I personally don't believe that they get a chance to show off their talent like we had a chance to see 20 years ago, because of the way the package is, the coil binding, the way the splitter is, things of that sort has just put everything in such a tight package. And now we've got so much side force with the way that we develop the aero with the sides of the car that come up over the hood and under the door. It just seems a lot. I agree that everything should evolve and everything should change, because motorsports is an ever-changing world. But I think that we've gotten so far now that the drivers have become almost irrelevant in some cases.
Well, I'm going to tell you.
But I don't. Sorry, go ahead, Greg. Sorry.
Well, that's a little bit of a contradiction too. In what you hear what Brad Keselowski says, but he's just one voice. But we know, and Richard can back me up on this. We know a lot of things that we can do to make these cars take away some downforce where it puts it back in the driver's hand. You can go and lop off about 4 inches of the right rear quarter panel where we reduce some of these side forces. But here's the problem. The drivers are going to be the very ones that scream about that and not like that. You know what I'm saying? So it's a fine balance between what the drivers want and what the drivers like. And NASCAR walks that tightrope because, for every Brad Keselowski you've got several others that are on the opposite side of the fence. And we know of a lot of things that we can do aerodynamically to those cars to change them. But NASCAR allows the rules to be what they are because the drivers, they are their ticket. That's what brings the fans in. It's not so much the cars like it used to be back in the day when I started being a race fan. It was a lot about the iron that we raced, and they brought in a lot of fans. Now it's a totally driver-driven sport for the most part. They are the stars, and NASCAR will cater to them in just about all cases.
Okay.
And another major story coming out this week, Brad Keselowski admitted and announced that at the end of the season, his truck team, Brad Keselowski Racing, is going to shut down. It is the only full-time Ford truck team, and it has one driver, Chase Briscoe, right now in the playoffs on points, and Austin Cindric, 10th, about 50 or so points on the outside. It's only 10 years old, that team. Ford does not do much, if any, support to the truck series. Chevy does more support than Ford. Toyota does more support than Chevy and Ford combined. Although most of that Toyota support goes to one of 2 teams. You can probably guess which one. But that being said, there's a lot of talk about crate motors for the truck series to try to cut costs. There's a lot of talk about even possibly taking away or banning wind tunnel time for the truck series to try to cut costs. Parker Kligerman, for example, who finished in the top 10 for Henderson Motorsports this past weekend, that team only has 2 full-time employees compared to Brad Keselowski Racing, and they're a part-time team. Basically, what are your thoughts on BKR shutting down?
I think it's a shame, but there again, the big thing is, and Kyle Busch has addressed this with his truck team as well. It's the cost. Those are not money-making propositions. They're going to lose money in the long run. And I know a lot of people look at that and say, well, they got all this sponsorship, and you've got a car owner that makes all this money. But when you've got the salaries and everything else that go along with it, these are, and you don't have the big TV revenue that the Cup Series has. These guys, even the teams that we look at as well funded, struggle to turn a profit. And in most cases, they don't turn any profit at all. And a lot of that is true when you go up into the Xfinity Series. The Xfinity Series, at best case scenario, is a break-even proposition. And I think, if NASCAR is going to these, with for lack of a better term, these AA and AAA series to survive, NASCAR is going to have to take a serious look and giving these 2 series a little bit of an injection of funds, either it be in a better TV, negotiating a better TV package for these guys, doing something with purses or whatnot, or you're going to see the car counts and the truck counts diminish greatly in the years to come.
Yeah, we saw KHI pull out some years ago, and we saw the sport take a pretty big hit in the truck series with that. And this is just going to be the equivalent to that. It's going to be another huge hit. And honestly, there's not enough fans in the stands to justify the Truck Series right now. And that's sad because the Truck Series is highly competitive, but there's not enough marketing that gets put into it. There's not enough prize money that gets put into it. And there hasn't been enough prize money being put into the Truck Series for a long time. And, at first it was NASCAR thinking, well, we can trickle our Cup guys in there and it'll help, bolster everything because they want to see those drivers. There's a reason the Truck Series flourished for a long time when we didn't have all those people mixed in, and it's just because it was a really good racing product, and we got to learn who these guys were that are in the Cup Series now. I think about Kurt Busch. You think about Greg Biffle there for a long time. And it was executed again in the Xfinity Series, then known as the Busch Series. Mark Martin would come down and occasionally whoop everybody's butt. And, but we had the number 2 AC Delco Chevy that, whether it was Steve Park or Dale Jr., and we got to learn more about those guys come up before they made their chances at the Cup Series. There was a lot of health because, A, it was being marketed the right way, and it was just being executed across the board the right way. But I think that now we have such a lack of funds that that's why there's talk of crate motors going into the Truck Series, because realistically, building motors is expensive, and to ask a team to do that, I know some of them are up in arms over that, but realistically, you look at how everything's being handled right now, and it's hard to think that this thing can continue to go on like this for another 5 years without some sort of major influence one way or the other.
And you're right, exactly. And also, you brought up the idea of crate motors. We're going to introduce the composite bodies on the Xfinity Series cars coming up at Richmond. We're working on those in our shop now, and that's the wave of the future, and that looks like that's going to be somewhat of a cost-cutting measure, and we'll probably see that introduced possibly in the Truck Series down the road. I think what they want to do in the Truck Series first is do the crate motors and do the Xfinity with the bodies, and then maybe flip-flop and introduce crate motors in Xfinity down the road and composite bodies in trucks later as well as a cost-cutting measure. But, you brought up the idea about the health of the 2 series with the, we'll say interlopers, bringing the Cup guys in. And that's what the fans want to see. And then obviously we've had all this go on the last couple of years where they're reducing reducing the participation of the Cup drivers in both series. They want to try to see these young guys make names for themselves. But I think in most cases, the fans who go to the Sunday races still want to see those same established stars race on Saturday. So I think the jury's still going to be out on that, whether that's going to succeed. I had my doubts when it did, but we'll see how it goes down the road, because the proof's going to be in the pudding in the number of the TV ratings and the fans in the stands.
I know Seth, you're eager to make this point, but let me jump in here quick. I think you look at a track like Eldora, and it is the perfect embodiment of everything the Truck Series should strive for, because that place packs out, not just because we see a unique show on dirt, but also we get to see a mix of short track talent, dirt track talent, short asphalt, etc. They're all mixing it up with either some Cup guys that can make the show or established drivers. We see Ken Schrader come into that thing from time to time. You get a healthy mix of everything from every form of short track, stock car racing. It's all there. So if you can find a way to replicate that at a couple of other venues, and note that it's Eldora. It's not one of the 3 races for NASCAR at Texas Motor Speedway or Charlotte. They go off and they do their own show somewhere else in a different market where fans don't generally get NASCAR racing. And I think that's very much key. You look at places like Gateway that they go to. They do a good job with marketing that area. Not marketing, but a good job with the fan base there. Lucas Oil used to be a pretty popular place. You look at all those venues that go away from the grain, away from the SMI and ISC tracks, hitting up their own markets to bring in a healthy balance. And I think if you can execute what you have at Eldora at multiple places, then the Truck Series is definitely something that can thrive. And why not try to execute that in Xfinity as well?
I think you made a good point, and one of the biggest mistakes I think NASCAR ever made was taking the Xfinity and Truck Series races away from Lucas Oil Speedway. We used to call it IRP, the same week as the Brickyard 400. That brought a lot of fans into the area, and it gave them a mix of different racing. You're exactly right. Those shows were terrific shows over there. They would race trucks one night, then race the Xfinity cars, and then we'd go over to the Speedway, for the Cup cars. Similar thing happens in May. You have a week of sprint car and midget car activity all around the area that leads up to the Indy 500, on Sunday. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I think you can market these things a lot better, but I do believe that they didn't need to go away from Lucas at all with the two minor league series. I think that actually enhanced the Brickyard 400 weekend.
Now, the 2 points I have, one, Joey had mentioned KHI shutting down. That was, you could say, the first domino. You also had Turner Scott go away. You had Junior Motorsports, their truck team went away. You now have Brad Keselowski going away. You had Red Horse Racing go away. You had a lot of the powerhouse teams disappear. In that time, you've also had GMS Racing come into the sport, and you had Hattori Racing, the 16 truck, go from part-time to full-time. Otherwise, there haven't been a lot of new teams in the truck series. Now, going also to what you were saying about them leaving short tracks and joining the Cup Series, next season there are 9 weekends in which there are triple headers. Daytona, Dover, Vegas twice, Bristol, Phoenix, Homestead, Texas. Granted, there will be a lot of fans at all of those races. But at the same time, you're not giving the Truck Series its own identity anymore. You're going to have a lot of drivers from the Cup Series go down. I mean, granted, this year it's mainly been Kyle Busch or the Dillon brothers. But by having them constantly at the 1.5-mile tracks, they're not getting the exposure that they once did, in one sense. Send them to Hickory. Send them to South Boston. Send them back to short tracks, or at least some short tracks.
Yeah, and NASCAR is going to have to work with these tracks and not come up with these exorbitant sanctioning fees to get them. Obviously, in some places, the tracks are going to have to bring their standards up a little bit, but don't kill the tracks with exorbitant sanctioning fees to do it. They're going to have to work with them, because basically, if they don't put in some stopgap measures, we're going to have some serious problems in both of those series down the road, I think. But yeah, I just think that the variety will help the series, those two series, more than anything.
So guys, so we're off next to Darlington. Now we have this next weekend off, correct?
Xfinity is at Road America.
That's always a fantastic event. Yeah, so the Cup season is off. So we could actually hold off on making our picks for Darlington and think about it for another week. But again, the Darlington, the Southern 500, everyone's getting ready with their retro paint schemes. We've seen a lot of these coming up there. Keselowski's going to be running the Midnight.
There's one car that I know of that will not have a throwback paint scheme, and that's Kurt Busch. He's running the Monster car.
Yeah,
Kurt Busch.
Yeah, some teams go for it, but that's turned out. Darlington hit a home run with that several years ago with the throwback weekend, and it's the fans have really responded. The last several years, Darlington has been, one of the better attended races, close to a sellout the last 3 years, and the fans really enjoy it, and it's kind of giving the fans back a little bit. Of what they want to see. The teams really enjoy it. They get up for it. There's a lot of effort and emphasis put in their throwback color schemes. I know ours Our 3 car was done today out on our shop floor today, and it's a throwback themed car that I think the fans will really like. It's the old it's already been done. It's not a big secret, but it's the old blue and yellow Wrangler colors that Dale Earnhardt had many years ago, and that car looks really good.
Yeah, it does look really good. Yeah, that's Dale's first couple of championships behind that Wrangler car. So, but Darlington, that's a track I've been to once or twice, and Gray, you go there every year. It's a neat place, but we've got a week off, so we'll hold off for making picks for Darlington until next week's show. But before we run out of time, I want to talk about Formula One. We got a little bit of big news in Formula One. Joey, one of your favorite drivers, has extended his contract in the next year. I'll let you go ahead and announce that.
Yeah, one of the funner personalities in Formula One, even though he doesn't say much. Kimi Räikkönen is re-upped with Ferrari on what has become a continued one-year rollover. I don't expect this thing to carry past next season, especially when you've got Antonio Giovinazzi and Charles Leclerc hanging around Ferrari junior drivers. But, good for him. I don't know if this is going to be him accepting the role of number 2 permanently or anything like that, but it comes at an opportune time over the summer break, and they're getting ready for Spa this next weekend, and it's a place that he's owned pretty well. So interesting to see how everything plays out. It's the first domino to fall in silly season as we wait to see what happens with Sergio Perez and Fernando Alonso and guys like that.
Absolutely. Now, Christopher, for your part, you threw $20 on the table earlier. You said Kimi doesn't win this year.
I think I'm okay with that.
You said it.
Yeah, I think it was Kimi. Yeah, I don't think he's going to win the rest of the year. Although he may come close. I think he might get a podium or 2.
All right, but Ferrari still will benefit from his years of experience in the series. He's got a title several years ago, and in one of the most interesting championship runs that went down. It was
2007.
Yeah, boy, he'd say it was Scott Dixon-esque in 2013, where he jumped from third place in the standings to go ahead and take the thing. So yeah, good for Kimi. Good to have him around. He left the series for a little while. He's run NASCAR trucks and everything else that's fun. So good to have Kimi around. I imagine that Vettel is still going to be right there in the other Ferrari. But again, there's a lot of bricks to fall. Renault was in flux. Joey, you could tell us more about some of these other teams through the grid or who we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, as far as right now, we're still trying to figure out with Mercedes, Hamilton, and Bottas. From what I understand, from everything that I've seen and people I've talked to, Toto Wolff really likes the combination of Hamilton and Bottas. It's worked out better than he had thought. And obviously, to re-up with Ferrari. Red Bull's going to continue the status quo with Ricciardo, with Verstappen. I think really the question is Renault going to go the way of Robert Kubica after a pretty impressive test a couple weeks ago, or are they going to try to maybe go somewhere else? Maybe they go Force India 2.0 and bring Sergio Perez in as a teammate. That's been rumored. But and Perez said he wanted a deal after the summer break somewhere. So currently no takers, apparently. Big surprise. But, all in all, I think the interesting thing is with Ferrari announcing a deal with Sauber for updated motors, it's going to be interesting to see where Pascal Wehrlein falls and where Marcus Ericsson fall, because I honestly think that we could see Sauber become the Toro Rosso for Red Bull that Red Bull is. I think that we're going to look at Sauber as what Ferrari's going to do, because I think Giovinazzi and Leclerc are both going to occupy seats at Sauber next season, which is going to leave Pascal floating somewhere, and it's probably going to leave Ericsson out of an opportunity.
Yeah, I think some of the sort of feedback from people that I know at Mercedes are saying that the reason Wehrlein didn't get moved to the Force India drive and Ocon sort of got the prime drive ahead of him is because Verlaine's not the easiest guy to work with. He's not a team player. He doesn't interact well within the organisation. He doesn't work well with other engineers and other drivers. He's very much his own person, and maybe you need a little bit more than that in Formula One. You need to, especially at that stage of the career. Yes, when you've won multiple world championships or you've been in the sport for 10 years, you can have that sort of outlook. But I think at his stage, I think he needs to be a little bit more of a team player. And from all the information I've heard, that was one of the reasons he didn't get that Force India drive this year. So he hasn't really dominated at Sauber as you'd expect him to. So maybe he's one of these guys that's a pretty good driver, but his timing's not right and his face just doesn't fit within the organisation, and he'll be farmed out back to DTM or IndyCar or something like that, and just another talent that misses out on Formula One.
Yeah, I look at that situation. I mean, you take one look at Wehrlein, and he has the look of a Lewis Hamilton and the diva kind of personality, but it's not coming with the same results.
Exactly.
But
he doesn't have the car of a Lewis Hamilton.
Well, I was about to get to that. Is that he's driving a Sauber with a year-old Ferrari engine, and he's still the only guy between his teammate and him that's finished in the points, despite missing the opening 2 rounds. So I mean, it's not terrible drives, but I think when you see what Ocon did head-to-head with him at Manor last year, I mean, it makes all the sense in the world to say, okay, Ocon 2, we're sticking in that ride. I actually wonder myself, because another guy that's a Mercedes junior driver that's fallen by the wayside is Felix Rosenqvist, and he's shown to be a jack-of-all-trades kind of driver, no matter if it's in Super Formula in Japan. It doesn't matter if it's DTM or an Indy Lights or an IndyCar test opportunity where he was on par with Scott Dixon's pace at Mid-Ohio 2 years in a row. I wonder myself, how does this guy not fit into the equation in some capacity, at least for, a back-end role, and Wehrlein does. It's kind of like Red Bull Academy. There's all these junior drivers, but really hardly any of them get through. Kind of chiming off of talking about silly season, I'm kind of curious where everything sits at Toro Rosso, because Carlos Sainz is somebody that I could see sliding over to McLaren and filling in Fernando's shoes, or sliding into Renault, and because Pierre Gasly's probably going to be a Toro Rosso driver next year. It's just a matter of whose seat he's taking. You could argue that Danny Kvyat doesn't deserve the seat. I would argue that they just replaced Danny Kvyat at Red Bull Racing with somebody just as reckless in Verstappen. Even though the ceiling's higher, he's made a lot of the same mistakes. So he's taken out his teammate a couple of times this year, so along with a few other people. So I would look at this situation and wonder who they're really going to go with, because their attachment to Kvyat seems genuine. So I don't really know if their attachment to Sainz is just as genuine.
I mean, they do seem to. I believe at some point somebody within the Toro Rosso or the Red Bull camp has said that we want to keep Sainz, but if we appreciate how talented he is as a driver, and if an offer does come along, and he has an opportunity to go and race somewhere else, we'd listen to that offer. Now that doesn't sound very reassuring for the kid, unfortunately. But as you say, it's one of those things, and I've talked about this with a lot of people. The benefit of being involved in the Red Bull young driver scheme, or the McLaren young driver scheme, or the Ferrari young driver scheme, they take so many. What does it actually take to succeed? What does it take to get that drive in a Red Bull, a Ferrari, and Mercedes? Because Mercedes have this big pool of young drivers, and I mean, I've worked with Valtteri. I've got a huge amount of respect for him. I think he's a fantastic driver, very underrated. There was people within that pool that maybe could have taken that ride, and because of certain situations, he's missed out on that. I mean, it does help massively that Valtteri's manager is, of course, Toto Wolff. I mean, that smooths a lot of the contract negotiations out quite quickly. But how many of these? I mean, Red Bull have 2 drivers that came through their scheme. Because everybody associate Sebastian Vettel with the Red Bull Young Driver Scheme, but I believe he actually came through the BMW Young Driver Program, and that all got a little bit messy when because Vettel subbed for Kubica after he had his
2007 U.S. Grand Prix, scored a point.
He scored a point on his debut, didn't he? So, and then Red Bull sort of Toro Rosso snapped him up pretty much straight away, didn't they? So that, is it as good as it seems? Is it good that you get involved in these organisations? I don't know. I really don't know. And then do you end up diluting the field? Because you end up with Red Bull and Toro Rosso, Ferrari and Sauber, Mercedes and Force India have quite a close contact. That then just leaves sort of Renault, Williams and McLaren as the outlying teams with nobody to work with. And I don't know if it does dilute the teams or dilute the sport, maybe, because you end up with a platform of maybe 10 top-class drivers filling the top teams, and then almost like the rest of the field's like kindergarten. I don't know if it's a good thing or not. It's an interesting question. I don't know what you guys think about that.
It's almost like college football, where the top teams stockpile talent, and you just recruit 4 and 5 star talent, and you don't have anywhere to put them. You got tremendous depth, but you can't play everybody.
I think that we're really close to seeing and I don't know if, I'm not going to say it's going to be next year, obviously, but I think with the change in leadership at Liberty Media, I think we're probably within 3 to 5 years of seeing customer cars finally hit Formula One. I think that, and there's a lot of interest. Prima recently came out, a very high-end junior level teams recently come out and said they'd be interested if they went customer car racing. I know Michael Andretti has said a long time ago that if they ever went customer car racing in Formula One, that he would definitely be interested. So, the interest for customer cars would be there, and that would just continue to be. You could argue that that's kind of what led to Haas happening. I mean, in a way, it's customer car, but it's just a different label. Tag Heuer can put their badge on a motor, but it's not a Tag Heuer motor. We all know that. So at the end of the day, it was about money to kind of dictate the classification of customer cars. But I think that we're very close to seeing that actually be a thing, especially when you look at the car count that's in F1 right now. That's something that I think we have a lot of good drivers that isn't in F1, and I think that would certainly enhance the product if customer cars became something that came to the forefront.
It's a difficult way of looking at it, and I think they've talked. And remember back at one of the pre-season tests when Ross Brawn was announced as coming on the technical side of the Liberty setup, he was talking about, and I've seen it firsthand, some of the work that goes into components and parts that the fans never see, and in reality don't make any difference whatsoever to the performance of the car. It's huge waste of resources goes into silly little components in the car that nobody sees. But there's a very, very fine balance there. You can't water it down so much that the manufacturers, the marquee names that people associate with Formula One and the self-proclaimed premium motorsport series in the world, you can't detract from them. You need the manufacturers in. I mean, in an ideal world, I guess you'd have 10 independent teams that are all owned or managed by the leading 10 car manufacturers in the world, and with drivers from all over the world. And I'm sure that's the ultimate goal, isn't it? But it's how you get there and how you can encourage the likes of Toyota to come back into the sport, BMW, and for the sake of the championship, a US manufacturer, whether it be Ford or Chevy or one of these manufacturers, to come back in and be involved. But if they're just buying parts off the shelf, they've got to look at how they distinguish what they do compared to the other teams. And you see it probably more in Europe, the likes of Mercedes advertising, and when Renault were winning championship with Fernando Alonso, they actually produced a Renault Clio F1 championship winning car. There needs to be that marketing tool. There needs to be a reward for them pumping in $300, $400, $500 million a year into the sport.
I don't know. It's like Gray is probably the only one on the panel old enough to remember. But back in the 70s and 80s, Formula One was more of a chassis constructor's sport rather than a engine manufacturer sport. You know, 'cause you had a couple of engine manufacturers in there. You had your Ferrari, Alfa, Renault getting into the game, introducing the turbo to the scene. But everyone else ran a standard Cosworth, and they worked on their chassis design. You know, and then that's where your Lotus, your Williams, your maybe your Ligier was running the Cosworth before they aligned with Matra, and you'd have these seasons where you'd have like '82, you had was 11, 12 different winners. No,
you had Brabham.
Brabham was one of the Cosworth, you know, till they switched to Alpha. Well, they had Alpha, then they went to BMW. Yeah, but it was more about the chassis design than the engine manufacturing. The engine manufacturer supplied just the engine. And
it's a very, very recent thing. I mean, you go back to the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, you've had Ferrari, who've been the classic one, but I mean, when did Renault come in as their own manager? They bought Benetton in, 2002, 2003?
Well, no, Renault first came in '78.
Yeah, but sorry, yes, as of the modern era, where you look at the manufacturers who are an engine and a chassis manufacturer. You know, you've always had Ferrari, and then it's really been in the last 15 years where it started to take off. And you saw Mercedes come in 2010. Honda and McLaren are becoming very, very closely aligned. Obviously you've got Renault sort of came and then went, and then they've come back a little bit. Toyota did that for a while. BMW did that when they invested heavily and pretty much bought Sauber out. But then the problem is they come and go so quickly because they've all got shareholders and committee meetings. And my understanding of the situation is that when Honda pulled out of Formula One in 2008, back in 2008, this was all decided in about half an hour. They had a committee meeting of the board of directors and the shareholders of Honda in Japan. It was around the time of the financial crash, and they were looking through the books, and they saw $300 million a year going to a Formula One team that hadn't been massively successful, and they had a show of hands and decided to close the team. That's the danger of having these teams involved, because they can come and go at the drop of a hat. You know, the likes of the Williams and the Saubers, they're the guys that stick around. So I think Formula One's got to be careful what they wish for, and hopefully Liberty won't pursue teams that come and go. They need some commitment.
I'll argue this. Though, is that if we had a situation of customer cars, at least some of those employees that lost their jobs would have a place to possibly go.
Let's also not forget that when Honda left the next year, what happens? The team wins. Go figure.
Well, Honda paid for that year. The year when Braun won the championship, that was funded by Honda, because it was cheaper for Honda to fund the team for a year and find a buyer than it was for them to shut everything down and pay a compensation to all the staff and all the penalties to the FIA because they signed up on long-term agreements, and it was too late in the season to sell. So that whole Braun project, even though they ran a different engine to the Honda engine, was actually paid for by Honda, which is a very, very strange situation. And as you mentioned, getting rid of people, the Braun organisation as a team went out to Australia and dominated the race. Jenson Button won there at a sort of 70% capacity. And then on the Monday, when Nick Fry and all the senior management and Ross Brawn got back to the factory in the UK, laid off a third of the staff the very next day, which is a pretty brutal way of doing it. But unfortunately, that's the nature of the sport.
I think the last, because I know we can't go on forever for the rest of the night, but my last note here to make sure we cover all our bases is, Toro Rosso, we alluded to them. James Key, their technical guy over there, has kind of extended his deal with them. Honda is desperate to get a second team. We talked about Sauber. Manisha Keltenborn, the former team principal of Sauber, was trying to do something with Honda. Those fell apart shortly after she was departed. And, they've fallen apart again, Honda's talks with Toro Rosso this time. So any chance Honda has of a second team for next year is looking very, very slim.
Sorry, on that point very quickly, don't want to interrupt there, but I think, and I may be right, you may know a bit more about this, but this year could be Williams' last year with Mercedes. I don't know if their contract is up for renewal or has been renewed or whatever it may be, but it wouldn't surprise me if Honda didn't talk to Williams. And again, it wouldn't surprise me even further down the line if McLaren did decide to leave Honda, that then Honda transferred across to Williams to become the main and sort of Williams become the main Honda team.
Yeah, I mean, it's smart of them to try to go after kind of the privateer squad, and something like Williams makes sense. And with somebody like Felipe Massa recently declaring, I'm good to go another year, getting a chance to develop that car with somebody that has that kind of experience would definitely be smart. The other thing is with some WEC teams deciding to change things, we look at Mercedes focusing a little bit more on their F1 and now Formula E efforts. You look at Porsche focusing on their Formula E efforts and kind of taking themselves out of WEC, which is hugely unfortunate because sports car racing is so critical for like the future of what we do with our everyday cars. But I think that there's a lot of talk.
Joey, so is Formula E. I think Formula E is more critical to the future of what we do with our on-road cars than sports car racing or IndyCar racing or anything. And I think that this is going to be the wave of the future. That's why Formula E, even though nobody watches it and the races are crazy where you have to hop out of your car into another one, the manufacturer interest in that series is at an all-time high compared to getting into Formula One or getting into WEC or getting into IMSA or IndyCar or NASCAR. Electric cars are going to be the wave of the future. They should have been 40 years ago, but they weren't. So it's Formula E, as kind of nondescript as it is to watch. Look at the manufacturer interest in that series.
I gather, but I'm saying that they were in an LMP1 team, and LMP1, especially when you look at the 24-hour Le Mans, which is historically the biggest race in the world. There's a lot of influence there with the hybrid systems and everything else going on, and converting. Let's be honest. There's a way to convert a series like WEC to run in a more electrical fashion. Electrical power, whatever. I'm not saying that Formula E is not important, but I just think that now we're really hurting the 24-hour Le Mans with the pull out of that. But where I was going with it was that there is talk that Porsche has a lot of high interest and has kept a lot of their WEC employees to maybe pursue a Formula One opportunity in 2021 whenever the new engine regs and everything else changes over. They're one of a number of teams or a number of manufacturers that have some interest in bringing maybe a new motor to the sport.
That would be awesome. Yeah, I'd love to see a few more manufacturers involved over there. But, guys, we are like way out of time. We're only 26 minutes over time, so we're 16 green, white Jaggers. So, but before we do, Formula One is in action this weekend at Spa. Spa, one of the fantastic classic courses where traditionally you get a wet race the time of year it's held. So, who do you guys like for Spa? Let's go around and make some picks for Spa before we sign off for the night. I'm going to start with you, Richard.
Well, I've just I had a quick check of the weather forecast, and there's an 80% chance of rain on Sunday, which is fantastic. I'm going to go for Max Verstappen.
Okay, all right. Gray, you got a pick for Spa?
Bottas.
Bottas, good pick. Joey?
I think it's going to be a Finn, but either one. But since Bottas is already taken, I guess I'll take Kimi.
All right, Seth?
I'll go with Daniel Ricciardo.
All right, and Chris?
Vettel.
Well, nobody took Hamilton, so I'll just go ahead and take Hamilton. So, yeah,
I thought you were maybe going to take a Force India car or a Williams there for a second and forget that Hamilton was still on the board.
I mean, Hamilton's still on the board. Might as well, snap that up. It's like.
I hope Hamilton doesn't listen to the show because he'll be sulking if he does.
You're right.
Yes, he'll be a little butthurt. So, but
well, we have a better chance since we have the iHeart thing going on now.
Yeah.
Great chance he listens to it.
But anyway, guys, we are like way out of time. I want to thank you, Richard, Gray, Joey, Chris, Seth. I want to thank all the listeners. I want to thank Whoobazoo Radio Network. This is Drafting the Circus. My name is Frank Santoroski. Enjoy the races next week. We'll talk to you in a week. Good night.
Whoobazoo.com.